And this is going to be the final screencast, unless there's some sort of, I don't know. There may be another, but kind of official topic at the moment, screencast. So, job stress and burnout. It's such an exciting one. So last we talked about interpersonal relationships and ones at home, and ones in our lives and so forth, that can cause us stress. Next to our personal relationships, our job and our work can be the next biggest stressor in our lives at times. And so, especially with maybe some of the careers some of you are going to be going into, this is a really good topic to think about how we don't become burned out and how maybe we understand these things that are happening to other people as well, as with all of these topics, really. So, okay, here we go. So, we're going to talk first about models of organizational stress. So, we are going to talk about burnout, we're going to talk about job stress. Organizational stress is stress that can come from the actual organization that we work for itself and kind of from the top down in a way. So, organizational role stress, Robert Kahn in 1964 first talked about this and had organizational role theory and believed that stress involves adjustment to our work roles and that there were three concepts that to consider in this role conflict, that we might have two or more role demands that are incompatible with one another. And so, what that actually might mean is not just work roles, but say being a good employee means I need to stay late, do overtime, always be available and present and for my job. But being a good parent means I need to be at home and I need to take care of, I need to be there for my family. I need to be home in a decent hour and all of these other things. So that's kind of a role conflict that can cause stress. And I mean, as a parent and someone who works, I can understand that. Coming up with a balance for those things can be tough. Role ambiguity, if we're in a workplace where we don't really understand our duties, responsibilities, and what's expected of us in our role, if it's not clearly defined, if we're not getting feedback on that in a constructive and good way regularly, that can cause us stress. And then, of course, role overload. Um, so that can be one of a couple of things. The overload can be kind of quantitative, that it's just too much and we don't have the resources to do the work we're supposed to do. We don't have the time for as much as being asked. That's kind of quantitative. Qualitative role overload can be that we really don't have the competencies, we haven't been trained adequately to be able to complete the work the way it's expected to be completed. So I can see, I know this is 1964, this was kind of all put out a long time ago, before I was even born, for heaven's sake. But I think it's still pretty, still pretty much what can happen or occur uh, in different jobs and what can cause us stress. Um, So this, okay, person environmental fit model. So here's some other things that can just cause us stress. Stress occurs when there's a poor fit between ourselves and the environment. And then we perceive either that our abilities don't match what is the organization demands of us, or that our needs aren't being met by the organization. So this can be, one example was like if somebody who really loves and is good working with small children is asked to work with like high school students or college students, it might be harder. And vice versa. I started out as a high school teacher, moved into the college teaching, and I I always knew it would not be a good fit for me to work with like kindergartners, or I mean I love them. I think they're so cute. Came to my house last night for Halloween. They're all so cute. I had my own, very cute. It would not be a good fit for me to work with them. Another example can be that I have a friend who's a very big extrovert, um, where we're kind of polar opposites in that, and she had to work at home by herself for a long period of time, and that was not a good fit. She was miserable because she was having no interaction with people. And so something like that, like if it doesn't just fit our skills, our preferences, our nature in a way that we can't necessarily just get over or change, that's just like that's a fit that we have to, that can cause a lot of stress. If we're not doing something that fits who we are. Job demands control. So strain occurs when a worker experiences high psychological job demands and has little control. So if we're in a position where we have a lot that we have to do, but we don't have very much control over it, um, then that can be, we don't have a lot of autonomy. Like, for example, this would be a fit issue too, but it would be hard for me to teach something where everything, like somebody else's material, all of it was given to me. I had little latitude in how I could teach it, what particular topics within the larger topic would be emphasized, how I would sort it all out. Like, that would be no autonomy if I was told, okay, you have to teach this every single day. This is the information you have to give all the time. It's kind of a small example, but I think it works and it fits. Like, if I had little control of authority or autonomy over how I taught, but I had all this work I was supposed to do and it was very demanding or something, that would be very, very stressful. So I think that people like to be able to be given guidelines and things that, like, we'd like to know what it is that's expected of us and then have some autonomy in how we go about doing that. Effort, reward, and balance. So people that feel like they're putting a lot of effort in or expected to put a lot of effort in and time in, but there's not a lot of gain, whether that be recognition, pay, um, it can threaten how much we feel that we have a mastery over something. It can threaten our self-esteem around it, our self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the amount of ability we have to control or change our situation, um, how much autonomy we have in a situation. So all of that can go down is that in a high stress, if we feel that we are expected to put forth more effort than we're going to be rewarded for, or either we're not recognized for it, we're not paid well for it, or whatever that might be. That can certainly cause stress. Injustice. Stress occurs when organizations' interpersonal transactions, procedures, or outcomes are perceived as unfair, disrespectful, um, prejudice, harassing, anything like that. Not only seen as unfair, but certainly very, very stressful upon the person. So these are all things within an organization that can cause individuals to feel stress. Different occupations, police and firefighters deal with work of it's kind of erratic. Sometimes there's nothing going on. Sometimes it's extreme in what's going on. And it can be even physically dangerous. That can certainly be stressful. Um, there seem to be higher rates of divorce and alcoholism, and which could be simply coping mechanisms for stress, for just having to, and I think in those kinds of um, jobs, you have to be like tough and able to manage things and think fast on your feet. And so maybe not a lot of opportunity to deal with the emotions around that, or even um, encouraged to deal with emotions around that. And so might be more of, coping mechanisms that are that have to be used, that are not like dealing with, but rather than trying to escape from those kinds of things. That's generalizing stereotype. I don't mean to stereotype or anything like that, but it seems to be the rates. The rates look like that, so just kind of proposing different ideas. People-oriented workers. Now that can be teachers, therapists, social workers, anywhere that we're dealing with other people on an ongoing basis, and especially I think if you're dealing with other people's stress, um, these people tend high stress, likelihood of burnout, low positive feedback. And a lot of those, it was specifically said for like social workers. I think a lot of people within these industries, there's not really a whole lot of good positive feedback. People aren't always even seeing how people are interacting with other people, and so they don't just get a lot of kudos for what they're doing. It can be lots of paperwork and bureaucracy to deal with, in difficult situations, and um, especially for like well, any of them, therapists, teachers, um, any healthcare, things like that. You're dealing with people all the time, and sometimes people who are in crisis. Nurses generally report high levels of stress. Physicians, high levels of emotional stress. They're dealing with the hard things people are going through. Physicians have higher rates of divorce, suicide, and abuse of prescription drugs than general population. Could certainly be kind of hours expected, again, being the answer to things, kind of like police and firefighter, and therapy, all of these. You're supposed to be the authority in situations. And people like that, when you're taking care of situations or others, so important to take care of the self, and sometimes not encouraged or given channels for or afforded, um, because of that discrepancy often between pay and effort. So lots of opportunities for stress in those types of situations. Office workers, coronary heart disease rates twice as high in women clerical workers than like in homemakers, women that stay at home. Clerical work has high work overload and perceived lack of control. You don't have a whole lot of autonomy, have a lot of high work that's demanded, things you have to do. I hate to say it, it's probably a lot of sitting too, well, walking around the office and having to deal in that and deal with people constantly and people that might be upset about things and having, again, to manage those situations. Managers with difficulty coping with stressors more likely to report high levels of anxiety, depression, and alcohol consumption. I think any occupation can bring stress, especially if it has any of those either wrong fit, um, high demand, low reward, not a lot of autonomy, not a lot of decision-making power. Any of those can, you know, kind of add to what might be seen in these situations. So just a couple of things. There was an analysis found that work stress contributes to significantly higher coronary heart disease risk. Now we've talked about that with physiology. All of those things go back into that. What's going on inside the body when it's kind of chronically stressed. And if we spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, in just kind of our mainstream kind of working world, that's and if it's stressful to us or we're unhappy, that can be chronic stress. People who are in like dangerous situations and you're getting constant flashes of that, very difficult. Another sorry, sorry, found that work stress accelerates coronary artery disease in women. Models of work stress, all these things that we're talking about, help us understand their role in the development of heart disease, but not the definitive answer, either why it develops or what we do about it. We might be getting some idea, but what the important thing is, how do we help people deal with this stress and with the burnout that might come with it? So let's talk about burnout and what that is, first of all, kind of what it is. Here's just a quote by someone who was kind of leader in this field, Ari Shiram. Burnout is an affective, emotional reaction to ongoing stress whose core content is the gradual depletion over time of individuals' intrinsic energetic resources. So their internal resources of energy, including the components of emotional exhaustion, physical fatigue, and cognitive weariness. So it is an emotional depletion that affects your motivation and ability to satisfactorily complete work. I hear a lot about motivation from like students in my Active Minds group and in my classes, and I think those things can also go if you're in a class that doesn't have a real good fit for you, that's something you're interested in, it has a heavy work overload. These burnout can happen to students just like that's the job of a student, is to be a student. And I see it in my own son sometimes. It's hard. Long-term process mediated by our emotional reactions to stress. So a different researcher, Christina Maslach, created the Maslach Burnout Inventory. Unfortunately, I can't find an online um, thing for this specifically that gives you this. I was going to tell you what some of these questions were. So it would be something like choosing between never, almost never, rarely, sometimes, often, very often, always. Things like tired, disappointed with people, hopeless, trapped, helpless, depressed, physically weak or sickly, worthless or like a failure, difficulty sleeping, I've had it. So this is like a This is a short version of a different burnout inventory, but it's the same kind of thing, looking for what people are experiencing that goes along with burnout. So her inventory first focused specifically on people-oriented occupations like therapists, teachers, healthcare workers, things like that, where where your job is to deal with people all the time, and proposed that people feel stress from their ongoing and intense level of personal emotional contact. I think sometimes we don't give that enough credence. Like it's just like the work and the busyness and all of that, but sometimes it's so emotionally depleting because we're giving so much of ourselves that it can lead to emotional exhaustion. When we're giving so much out, if we are not taking the time to bring it back in, to refill ourselves, if we don't have social support and opportunities to relax, then we become very depleted and exhausted because we're constantly giving out. Can lead to cynicism or negativity and a loss of idealism. It was also referred to as like depersonalization at one point, where all of this, especially if you're dealing with people who are in crisis, we can become very depersonalized from it and become cynical and think that the world looks like this all the time and has to, you know? And reduced efficacy, feelings of diminished self-efficacy, which be like, I just can't help, like if it feels overwhelming that there's so much we're trying to accomplish to help others, and we don't feel like we can really make a difference, that can certainly be depleting too, especially for those who that's important to. So I think that's an important part that we don't actually give a lot of thought to sometimes. So some elements of, oops, some elements of this might look like depression, and burnout does hold some similarities to depression, but we just have to think of it as that burnout is associated mostly, we think of it as work environments. It doesn't necessarily come with the suicidal ideation or the weight loss or things like that that we might see um, in clinical depression. It and so that's just some of the differences. Advanced burnout does not necessarily lead to depression, could just be cynicism with one's job and client interaction. So the answer to burnout can sometimes be rest. It can be, well, we can talk a little bit about that. What would be the flip side of burnout, and how do we do that? But even trying to adapt to the job in ways that we can from the inside, shape the job in ways that are beneficial to ourselves, or sometimes it means leaving if it's not going to be the right fit, if there's too much, something, all those things that we talked about that can cause stress. So what is the flip side of the coin? So Chagra and Sharam in 2009 talk something about something called vigor. So vigor is meaning is kind of the opposite of that that like depletion. It's emotional energy, physical strength, cognitive liveliness, where the burnout is like the mind is not working well, we're not efficient, we're not effective, we're feeling weak and sickly, we're feeling emotionally distraught. Three themes of vigor can be meaningful interactions. When we are able, even in our work, to have meaningful interactions either with people we're working to serve or working with, that can give us some vigor. When we are challenged but not stressed, okay, so remember, when there's some eustress in in the job, when we feel challenged to the right degree, that can be light, that can make us feel lively. And when we have successes, it's really, really hard to feel good about anything when you just don't experience successes. So there has to be feelings of actually accomplishing something, making a difference, that can increase our vigor. So Maslow, we talked about just a minute ago, said engagement is the key to dealing with burnout. It's a high state of energy. Um, so if we look back at, sorry, emotional exhaustion, this is Maslow, emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and reduced efficacy. So engagement gives us high energy, strong involvement. We feel that like we are wanting to be involved, to get involved, and we are feeling that strong sense of efficacy that we can make a difference. It's very similar. Reduce burnout by finding ways to increase engagement. And I do think that a lot of the positive psychology, a lot of the mindfulness stuff helps us. It's like, how can we find hope? How can we find, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. How can we have positive affect that we bring to work with us? So burnout prevention. So some organizational, if you are in or at some point can help shape management or the organization as a whole, hiring employees to reduce work overload, instituting job orientations and preview programs so that new employees don't feel overwhelmed, so that they understand clearly what's expected of them, that they're given feedback and so forth. Give employees realistic and timely job performance feedback. uh, Constructive feedback, positive feedback first is always good. It's kind of the teacher's oath, right? Good feedback, constructive feedback, and then good feedback. Worker social support groups so that people can come together and have meaningful interactions. Cognitive restructuring intervention programs, so helping people to kind of work on all of these things that we've talked about and how to change their thought processes around their work. But I think one of the key things is that having organizations that make employee wellness important is so vital, and we're seeing more and more of it. But having employee wellness programs is huge, is a big first step. Self-care. Each individual takes responsibility for using strategies, using humor, quality time with friends and family, engaging in wellness behaviors, taking vacations. So taking care of ourselves, which is what this whole class has been about, right? I am going to actually pause because this is getting a little long and we have a few more to do. So you can pick up in just a minute.